Ready to go? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Megan Loeb, and I'm a program officer at Oregon Community Foundation. We're a statewide charitable foundation that gives typically a couple $100 million a year in grants around the state of Oregon. And in the wake of the pandemic and in the wildfires in 2020, we were asked to help our state in a way that we had never really helped before. And that was with a program called Project Turnkey. So we're delighted to be here today to share with all of you a little bit about this program and mostly to introduce you to some of the trailblazing organizations that are doing this work. I also want to acknowledge we have a few of those organizations also out here in the audience who have joined us, who are part of this Project Turnkey cohort. And I'm just delighted that all the rest of you have a chance to hear a little bit about this program today. So I want to back up just a minute. Back in 2020, we already had a housing crisis. And then we had the requirement of needing to provide non-congregate shelter. And on top of that, we had the Labor Day fires, and we were in panic mode. How are we going to provide for the most vulnerable members of our communities? And Project Turnkey ended up being a win-win solution. The idea was very simple: to provide funding to acquire hotels and motels that were not being utilized during the pandemic. People weren't traveling, to take those properties and to turn them into shelters pretty rapidly. And so the funds that were passed came from the Oregon legislature. It was $65 million. And they came to OCF. We are a grant-making organization, and they asked us if we would stand up a competitive grant program to help organizations acquire hotels and motels. We quickly got to work assembling a community advisory group that had people with lived experience with homelessness, lived experience with veteran services, with disabilities, providers who had expertise in shelter services, and providers who had expertise in affordable housing. And we took that statewide advisory group and we opened up a competitive application, and it was open for 2 weeks. And that might have even included the week of Thanksgiving. And we were stunned because we had a really wonderful response from communities, locally grown projects that they proposed to acquire hotels and motels in their communities to be stood up as shelter. We reviewed the applications based on a framework that the state provided around priority populations, and we worked equitably and quickly to distribute grants. Each applicant went through a due diligence process with appraisals and property inspections, and they put together organizational plans for their properties, and one by one, those properties were acquired. Nick, if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. Within 7 months, we awarded grants to 19 organizations to create 867 beds of shelter in the state of Oregon. And that was a 20% increase in our state's year-round shelter capacity. And it happened so quickly because of the work of the organizations on the ground doing this incredible, heroic effort. I really think it was a heroic effort. And based on the success of that initial model and data that was coming out of OHCS showing higher rates of transition to positive places and permanent housing, the state invested another $50 million in the program in 2022. And we've just completed a second round of the program, acquiring another 12 properties and leading to a 30% increase in shelter capacity in our state. Nick, if you want to go to the next slide. So this is a map, 36% increase in year-round shelter capacity in our state. So this is a slide that shows the different locations around the state. And it was a bold investment, but I call it an evergreen investment because this provided immediate shelter in the short term, but it has also created locally owned, locally led assets that our communities can steward for the long term to meet the shifting, changing needs of communities. So some of these might be shelter for the long term, like the Whiskey Inn in Pendleton that is now the Promise Inn, may stay shelter for a long time because it's the only year-round shelter that's low barrier and in their community. And others may shift to transitional housing or permanent supportive housing over time. Next slide, please. As I've made my way around the state and gotten to know these projects, I'm blown away by their models of operation. there's Lincoln City that's doing incredible work with Coastal Phoenix Rising, CPR, bringing people back to life and to thriving. Out in Malheur County, we have an amazing project underway right now, a massive renovation that's going to provide shelter and housing there. Thank you, Christy, for your leadership of that. And in Portland, Central City Concern is offering early recovery housing through culturally specific lenses. Each model is unique and it serves a priority population, providing services on site and offering long-term stability, but also offering the ability to decompress and stabilize and move to permanent housing at higher rates. So I am delighted today to have 3 of the Project Turnkey property owners and operators here to share with you a little bit about their model. We're going to have each of them share for about 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes tops. Dan negotiated 5 minutes about their model. And then we will have a couple of lightning round questions and we'll open it up to all of you for questions. And so I want to begin with Dan Easdell with Corvallis Housing First in Benton County.
Good morning. First of all, before I start using up my 5 minutes, this part doesn't count. It's just great to be with people. I think the pandemic was very isolating, and this has just been so refreshing to be back in the same room with people. You can move to the next slide, Nick. So Corvallis Housing First is a small organization. Prior to the pandemic, we were 4 or 5 full-time staff. So we are small. We have 40 units of our own permanent supportive housing, and we also provide a lot of case management, not just to people who are in our housing, but also to other organizations in the community. Nick, if you want to go to the next slide, just our logo. Benton County is #1 in the state for having the highest percentage of rent-burdened households. It is a very expensive place to live. We also have a history of a lack of shelter beds. Prior to the pandemic, we really didn't have any shelter beds that were open year-round. We had a few high barrier shelter beds. So the pandemic comes and Project Turnkey comes, we have a golden opportunity. So Nick, if you want to go to the next slide, you can show them what we bought. We bought this old 1950s motor lodge that has 25 rooms. Curiously enough, no room 13 because apparently the builders were suspicious about that. So there's 25 rooms. The building on the left is a little older than the building on the right, and also a little higher off the ground because turns out this is in a floodplain. But what you can't see behind this building is there is an empty lot that adds almost doubles the size of the lot. So it's actually a very big lot with this motel kind of planted right in the middle of it. The building up in the front is the house where the owner of the hotel lived. Up until we bought it and displaced him. Oof. So this was really a great opportunity because we did not have shelter beds. Our goal with this property has always been to convert it to permanent supportive housing, but we knew that was going to take some time, so we opened it up immediately as a shelter. Nick, if you want to go to the next slide, please. As Megan mentioned, the timeline for acquiring this property was incredibly fast. We applied, I say we, I didn't do any of this work, but we as an organization applied in October. We were approved soon thereafter. We purchased the property in February and we started housing people in May. And that was a lightning turnaround for an organization as small as we are. We obviously wanted to target individuals who were highly susceptible to COVID. So that was our initial group that we wanted to house. These were people with existing medical conditions generally, and also older. But we also We're very conscious that Corvallis, like the state, like the nation, has a history of systemic racism. And so there are groups within our homeless population that are overrepresented. For example, in Corvallis, the Native American population of homeless is about 15%, and it's less than 1% of the total population. So we also wanted to give those folks a shot as well. We set aside 2 rooms in the motel for medical respite. There are a number of uses for that. We partnered with Samaritan Health to occupy those rooms. I won't go into any details right now. We also had no place in Corvallis for people who got COVID to quarantine. So we set aside 3 rooms initially in the pandemic when we purchased this for people to quarantine in. Below there, you'll see some of the notable pieces of data. 113 different individuals have come through there right now. We are now over 20,000 total bed nights. I'll get into the services a little bit, but we have housed 23 people coming through there. On the top line, you can see the clients are divided into 3 categories. Shelter is anyone who really is not quarantining or in medical respite. It's about half of the population, a little less, that's come through there. Those tend to be longer term. We have been providing ongoing case management to that group, and we have housed 23 of them. Only 3 have returned to being unhoused. I think for all of us who work in this field, death is a part of it. We have had a number of deaths. We've actually had more since I put these statistics together. What we have noticed is that there is a significant population of people who are extremely vulnerable, and they are living out their final days with us. I want to say, though, that none of those deaths were COVID related. I'll make mention about that a little bit later. You can see some other demographic information there about our folks. What's not mentioned is average age of everyone is over 50 at this place, and also no children. We decided early on that we would not house children at this site, and the main reason, there are multiple reasons, but the main reason is insurance. Nick, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So staffing and partnerships. We partnered right away with Unity Shelter, who's a local organization in town, because they operate the shelters in town. That's their specialty. We wanted them to do that at our location. So they currently operate it. They provide 24/7 staffing. They provide community health worker. We provide the housing case management. We have a ton of partners, Samaritan Health, I mentioned them, the harm reduction team at the county, and a whole bunch more. The motto we are using, obviously it's in our name, Corvallis Housing First. It's this Housing First low barrier program, and trauma-informed services. Everything is trauma-informed. My notable highlights, I want to go back to housing people. Housing people in Corvallis, probably like every community, is extremely challenging. So for the community to be able to house people is really, really big. To get people permanently off the streets and into housing in our community is fantastic. We have also created a team to follow up for folks so people are staying housed. And again, part of what we did at this hotel was a response to COVID. We knew that there were people out there that were extremely vulnerable and could die because of COVID and not having any place to go. And we had great success in making sure that that didn't happen. So for me, there are solutions to big, big issues. Having this space has not only been one way of tackling pandemic measures, but for many other things too. However, the highlight of what we're doing is the next slide. This is a sketch of what we are planning to build. Really quickly, we have discovered that the current buildings are not worth keeping. Renovating them would just be too expensive, so we are going to completely rebuild. The building in front is a services building. We will be partnering with folks to bring medical care, mental health care, employment services, et cetera, right on site. The building in the middle, kind of attached to the front building, is a community building. We'll have all kinds of community services there. And then in the back that you can't really see too much, 46 permanent supportive housing units. Timeline for this is hopefully we can start construction fall of next year and finish in a year or so. And with that, I'll wrap up my comments. Thank you. Thanks for everyone for showing up.
Thank you, Dan, so much. The next speaker we have is Kenny Lapointe with Mid-Columbia Community Action Council. And Kenny's project is a 2.0 Project Turnkey property. So it's one of the ones that was just acquired this year that has been under really incredible renovation and has a grand opening planned in a couple of weeks. So Kenny, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Megan. Again, Kenny Lapointe. I'm the executive director of Mid-Columbia Community Action Council. To give you a little framework for our agency, we serve Hood River, Wasco, and Sherman counties in the Columbia Gorge region. We have about 55-ish thousand people in our 3-county area. We have a homeless population just under 300 in that 3-county area, with a lion's share of that population being in Wasco County, the city of the Dalles. So I'll talk more about our project, but it is in the Dalles, surprise. We applied for Project Turnkey. You can go to the next slide, please. So there's a little before and after, but can you go to the next one? So first of all, the date at the top is incorrect. Apparently I'm stuck in 23 while we're in 23. So we applied in July of 2022 for Project Turnkey, and we were approved later in the year, and we closed escrow on our purchase on February 1st of 2023. We have done a soft opening on our site already, and I'll kind of talk about that in a moment here. But so our agency has been the primary shelter provider in our region. Prior to 2020, there was no year-round shelter at all. It was severe weather emergency shelter, and we really advocated to get a year-round shelter because we were in a position where people were not being rehoused. They were just staying out on the street when emergency shelters weren't operating. And I knew that in order to get people back into permanent housing, we needed to stabilize them and provide them with the services that they needed in order to get into permanent housing. We have been running a shelter site in Hood River and in the Dalles prior to this. The Project Turnkey purchase allowed us to really have some better infrastructure for our staff and for the people being served. So we've been running a non-congregate shelter site in the Dalles that is pallet shelters. If you're not familiar with those, look them up. They're not made of pallets. So we've been running a 36-bed pallet shelter site in the Dalles. When we purchased our turnkey hotel, which is very similar to Dan Story's old motor lodge, in very bad condition when we purchased it. We found this opportunity to transition our shelter operations into the motel, which allowed us to, give our clients restrooms in their own rooms. They didn't have to get up in the middle of the night and walk out and use either a porta potty, or we have a shower trailer that we own. So it's just a much more dignifying situation for folks. And we've already found that to be true. We did do, as I mentioned, a soft opening on August 28th. We moved all of our pallet shelter clients into the hotel. I'm glad we did a soft opening. We have 54 rooms in this site, and we are testing out infrastructure that is very old. So there was some leakiness going on, literally, that we had to have been working through. And fortunately, thanks to the Oregon Community Foundation, we've had money for remodel. The priority populations in our facility are individuals and couples, and our setup is very unique. We actually have two separate buildings they seemingly are two separate facilities. And so the second building we are having as a family shelter. So this is the first family shelter in our region. So we are serving families with children, but it's completely disconnected from the other site. So it's very nice to be able to have family shelter. We primarily housed families with children prior to our purchase here in this hotel. So most of our clients who are being served outside of our shelter were being housed in this hotel. In fact, I think we kept this hotel in business through the pandemic. So purchasing it made a lot of sense, and it allowed us to collate services on site rather than just having a hotel manager running the facility. So we have 24/7 staffing on the site. We have overnight security on the site, which I'll say is not for our clients to monitor them. It's to protect the community that we've established there. This project is the entry to downtown The Dalles, so it's the first thing people see when they come into town. It was very important to us that we make this building look phenomenal for the community, because we wanted folks to come into our community, into downtown, and be proud that we were housing people and be proud of the look and feel of this building. So we have approximately 75 beds in the facility. We actually have some capacity to put more folks in. We've done we'll have done nearly $2 million in renovation by the end. That was very much needed. Our purchase price was $3.2 million. So pretty good bang for the buck when it comes down to the number of rooms and number of beds that we have there. We have on-site behavioral health services, on-site physical health services. We have medical respite rooms. We also have on-site culturally specific services through partner organizations. So we're serving farm workers, which is a large population in the Mid-Columbia region. If you've ever been on the Fruit Loop, you know that there's farmers there. And then we have a large native population in our region. There's a lot of native treaty fishing villages in the gorge, and a lot of housing instability amongst Native and Latinx community members. So this is a place that we can end that housing instability. Everybody who comes in has to be on a housing case management plan. You can go to the next slide, please. So we work with folks to get them into permanent housing. That is our goal. And in our prior pallet shelter site in 2022, we placed 79 individuals into permanent housing from that 36-bed pallet shelter site. So we have a heavy focus on that. We have a lot of rapid rehousing resources thanks to a recent grant we received from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We have focused rapid rehousing resources in this facility, and it's called the Annex, by the way, which just so happened the letters fit in our motel sign to replace it. I call our site transitional supportive housing, TSH. We would love to be able to convert to permanent supportive housing at some point in time, but for now we're happy with what we are doing there. Our staff are super stoked to have much better infrastructure. They're not working out of an RV anymore, which is very, very nice. We have a lot more space for providing services to clients, which is great. The last thing that I want to mention is we just signed a programmatic payment model contract with Pacific Source, our CCO in the region. And so we are actually billing Medicaid for interactions with all of our Medicaid clients. So that is a sustainable funding source for us for staffing. So we estimate, I mean, it's new, so we just started to bill last month, but we estimate it's going to cover roughly 60 to 70% of our staffing costs on the site. So that has been a huge deal. We did not seek out Pacific Source. They came to us because they knew what we were doing. So it's been great to have that partnership. We've also transitioned most of our job position titles to community health workers or traditional health workers. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenny, for that overview. And we'll come back to you. I have a question for you in just a minute. But I do now want to introduce the last group here, a dynamic duo, Jane Downing and Sarah Brennan with Center for Hope and Safety in Marion County. They were part of the initial Project Turnkey 1.0 cohort and are here to share a little bit with you today about their extraordinary model.
Thank you. So the Center for Hope and Safety serves survivors of domestic and sexual violence in Marion and Polk County. So I believe we were one of two sort of population-specific programs that received hotels through the first round. We've had confidential emergency shelter for survivors for nearly 50 years in our community, and it has always been congregational. So you can imagine when COVID came, we had some issues. And actually, when the turnkey application came out, we had just talked as a leadership team that we had 14 different families in various hotels around the area. So we were also supporting some of those local hotels and trying to do our best to keep people separated, which obviously you can't do when you're sharing kitchens and bathrooms. We took a little bit longer to find a hotel. I will say that a lot of owners in our area heard about this and thought their hotels were worth a lot more than anyone else would. But we were, oh, yes, if you can go to the next slide, thank you. We were very, very fortunate to have a realtor who did a lot of cold calls for us and happened upon an amazing couple in Salem who owned a couple of hotels, heard what this could become, and decided, sure, we'll get rid of one and move on to some of our other ventures. And they kept up this motel until the day they signed it over to us. It was a Best Western, and truly we feel very, very fortunate. We have done some renovations or continuing to do so, but compared to what other things we looked at, we got really lucky. Before we leave this slide, I do want to note in the right-hand side, that's our newest playground with some turf. A local contractor came in with his staff and just put that in for us. So very exciting. Next slide. It did take us about 6 months to start using the hotel. Primarily because of the significant security measures. Again, for almost 50 years, we've had confidential shelters. Really hard to keep a hotel confidential. It's on a primary street. We're not serving anybody. People start to ask questions. And so we really had to reframe our thinking and add a lot of security measures. So we gated the entire campus. We have access codes for car and walking guests, and added, I think we have like 30 security cameras outside so we can always see what's going on, because again, our model's a little different. We are not staffed 24/7. This is independent shelter living. So we have staff there primarily Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We do have a 24-hour hotline that's always accessible to those residents and other survivors in the community. So they can reach us if something happens, but this just allows us to keep an eye on what's going on. So we have 52 rooms. We are actually going to be renovating and combining some rooms to create suites. And we've also had the experience, you're never going to have all the rooms online. We went from 6 toilets to 52 toilets. And that's a lot of upkeep. I'm just going to be really honest. Like there's always something wrong with one of the toilets. So, yeah. So, we have already had almost 18,000 shelter nights. We're probably, since these stats were pulled 2 weeks ago, over 260 residents. We are for survivors and children, their families. So with our model, it's always one parent households or individuals without children. One of the things we're really focused on is reaching underserved populations, and we have all of our services are available for Spanish speakers by bilingual, bicultural advocates. And we're really proud of the demographics of the folks that have come through, certainly much more diverse than the population of Marion County, if you're familiar with some of those numbers. So we also have seen our shelter stay lengthen to about 2 months on average. We don't have time limits. However, we are extending those, and having that time to be able to extend someone's stay has allowed us to move more than 70% of the households into permanent housing, which we're really, really proud of. So Next slide, please. We have 10 of our staff that are over. The hotel has two buildings with rooms and then another main area. So we took over the old conference room and have 10 staff that are shelter and housing advocates there that provide case management. We have a youth advocate that visits frequently to provide services for residents. So we're really excited for the availability to bring other partners in. Obviously, with our confidential shelter, we never did that. So we would have to bring any of the residents with us to our office to meet any community partners. So some of our partnerships obviously have included Marion Polk Food Share, Grand Ronde Warriors of Hope, the tribal resources for survivors of domestic violence. They have housed some people in our facility and co-case manage. We also have a partnership with Bridges, Oregon, who serve as victims of all crime who are deaf and hard of hearing. The one I do want to point out specifically is having the ability to have volunteers, like episodic volunteering on site. That the bottom picture, a team of professional organizers in the area asked how they could help. And they came in and created that pantry. They planned it, they suggested the right shelving. So instead of people coming to the front desk to ask for food, our residents get to come in and shop like a grocery store, but obviously for free. So when we look at that empowerment and choice, that is definitely one of our very favorite aspects. As you can see, we also have workstations. We did add a laundry facility that's available 24/7. We had contractors who came in and sort of took a chunk of what was the back of the house with the industrial machines and everything, and added laundry available. Next slide. We are in the middle of permits for our big renovation. We will be moving to a total of 22 suites. And so 22 of the rooms with bathrooms right now, we are taking offline, removing the bathrooms and installing these kitchenettes. Lit Workshops was actually a partner introduced to us by OCF. They work out of Portland and started, I believe, in like modular and pallet structures, and then heard about this and realized that we need really good, solid kitchenettes. So in the next 8 months, we will be converting, some of the rooms will be attached to 1 bedroom, and then some of the kitchen living rooms will be attached to 2 bedrooms. And every unit, so every resident family household will have a real sized fridge instead of a mini one, an induction 2-burner induction stove, and a convection oven microwave, which will really allow them to do a whole lot more cooking. Our staff got really creative around microwave cooking. Microwave rice makers and some slow cookers and things, but our insurance also has some issues with like hot plates. So the induction stovetop is something they agreed to. Before we moved in, we did update HVAC, new boiler, all that kind of exciting stuff. And we did have a pool that came with the hotel. We are converting that into an indoor play area where also the insurance company wouldn't allow us to keep that. So we are filling in that pool, and that will be an indoor play area for the couple of months a year that playing outdoors isn't quite as fun. So and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, we call our property Mosaic. It was a name suggested by one of our staff members about taking broken pieces and making it beautiful. So that's, you'll see that in our sign. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Well, I have just a couple questions for all of you. We're going to do them sort of lightning fast so we can get to questions that might be out here in the audience. But my first question is, what were some of the surprises for you in participating in this program? And what are some of those unique aspects of non-congregate shelter in a 1950s motel that you didn't anticipate when you started?
I'll start with the positive. It was really surprising to me how quickly community was developed at the motel. We were very conscious of this going in, that we wanted to create a community, even at a shelter, which is generally temporary. And this was one of the few sites that it's still congregate because no one has a kitchen. But having a room with your own bathroom, I don't think we can underscore how important that is for a lot of people. We have had much fewer issues with interpersonal relationships at this site than any of our other sites. And the community that's been developed there. So for some of our clients who are there on short stays, they really don't want to go because they have found a place where they belong and they want to stay. And so that can sometimes be heartbreaking, but community developed really quickly. I would say that was my biggest surprise.
So I think for us, I mean, as Dan mentioned, having a bathroom, which I already mentioned, like that's a big deal. And we had, like I said, we had a shower trailer, which was fine. It works. It's cool. But we found folks, you know, they had to schedule when they wanted to use the shower facility. Now we notice physical changes in people because they're showering every day. When we did our first move-ins on August 28th, it was pretty incredible because we moved all of our clients over, and we had churches and community groups who put together baskets and welcome mats and flowers for people when they came into their rooms, and they literally came back. I mean, it was a, you know, tearful day for staff and for clients, but clients came back to us and said, "Are you sure like that is for me?" And that, I mean, that says a lot, right? Like we're not in the business of just keeping people in a shelter and then having them stay there forever or having them come back because they're cold. We're in the business of providing dignity to people and giving them hope, because many of them, nobody hoped had hope in them before. And we really feel like we're able to impart that. The other thing for us is, from a staffing standpoint, like we're not having to do as much sort of back and forth, like, can you open the pantry for me? Can you do this for me? It's more, we're able to focus on case management. We're able to focus on helping people get to the next step. And so that's been a huge change, huge positive for us. On the other side, we found a lot of weird stuff, like a lot of weird stuff. Every toilet seat was different. It had like flowers on them and stuff. And we had to get rid of all of the carpet and all the furnishings because this hotel did have a bed bug problem at one point in time. And so we are using all hard surfaces now. And we own a bed bug oven, which doubles as a staff sauna. Not really. But we do have a bed bug oven. And we found a case of what is called vampire blood remover in the basement of our facility. So, and I'm not quite sure if it works well.
I hope you never have to find out. No one told me when you get into social services, you become obsessed with toilets, but obviously we all do. And things like that are huge. And our staff noticed that as well. You know, communal living is tough, even with people you've chosen to live with, let alone people that are in crisis and you're just, you know, randomly assigned to this stranger. So that has been huge for our staff to be able to really focus on the individuals and case management. I think some of the unique challenges we had, things like the door keys. Hotel key cards are evil, and ours were possessed. And we had a hard time getting in touch with the company and the contract, and literally the day of 1 year that we owned the hotel, they stopped working because apparently the contract had been extended a year. So in the matter of 24 hours, our facilities guy had to install 52 new keyed locks. And we get a lot of copies of those keys. With the renovations we're still talking about, if we're going to like a 10 key system or what, we're still thinking about that. For the most part, the keyed locks have actually been working okay. But that was a big struggle. We also had issues with power, and I don't know how the hotel dealt with it when they were full. I think people weren't there as often. If this was more of a hotel, you're out doing things or at the Capitol or whatever, and then come home to sleep. But between microwaves and hair dryers and everything else, we all know where the fuse boxes are now, and have actually had to do a significant energy upgrade in order for the kitchenettes to actually function when we put them in.
Thank you all for those responses. Dan, when you talked about community, I was reminded one of the new sites is a Family Promise site in Tualatin, Family Promise of Tualatin Valley, which is located in Tigard. And I was there a few weeks before they closed escrow. And there were people who were leasing or renting rooms individually through Family Promise on the 4th floor of the property. And it was not a welcoming place to come into. And I went back 3 weeks after they had closed escrow, and there were posters on the wall next to the elevator that said, family reading time with the library is at 9 a.m. and come join the breakfast conversation tomorrow at 2 or tomorrow at 8. It was a community, and the feel of the building, when you own the whole building and you can bring those types of services on site, is really key. I know each of you has a lot of partners who provide services on site. I think one of the most unique services that is provided actually at one of the sites is with a pool, where Rockwood CDC was going to fill in their pool. And one of the neighborhood associations came to them and said, we have really high rates of drowning among our children of color, and we would love to use this for swim lessons. Can we join you and have a partnership? And they now do that. And that's one example of services that have been creatively implemented on site. I wonder if all of you can talk a little bit about the types of services you offer on site at your properties.
So in addition to the case management, which is huge for us, being able to help survivors of domestic and sexual violence start that healing process and be able to move on to that housing, being able to bring service providers on site. We've never been able to do that before. So like Oregon Department of Human Services plans to bring their staff on site. So, reducing the amount of times that individuals are having to go out and get services away from our site. So we're just starting to bring some of those online. And we have lots of dreams, and which we'll talk about in a moment, for how that site's just going to continue to evolve and get better and better.
I also want to say we have a new relationship with a new mobile vet in Salem who comes to take care of the animals every few weeks. And it is so much easier to have him and his staff on site and do all the flea treatments at once, rather than trying to worry about transportation and scheduling. So check that out if you have one of those in your community.
We also had a pool that is not there anymore. It was covered for 15 years. I was very scared to take the cover off. But we've actually created a family area where the pool previously was on our site. And from like an amenities standpoint, we have laundry rooms for clients to use. We also have a food pantry, and we have a lounge area, and then we have an area where folks can, where other partners can come in and provide trainings on things. One of the services that I don't know that we've really talked about is, I think everybody is familiar with like Ready to Rent and Rent Well, those types of programs. We see this type of housing as Ready to Rent and Rent Well in action. So we've really utilize this to teach our clients. And believe it or not, a lot of folks don't know how to do their laundry, and they don't know how to prepare food. And so we see this as an opportunity to provide that type of education to folks. Additionally, we have on-site behavioral health services. So that was critical for us. We entered a contractual agreement with our behavioral health provider to come on site. We've set aside, I think, 22 rooms for them. One thing to note here is all the partners in this project, when we found this opportunity with Project Turnkey 2.0, we went to all these entities that were paying for hotel rooms throughout the community. And we said, rather than you pay for hotel rooms in the community at other hotels, why don't you give us your money and we'll set aside rooms for you, and then we can all support an asset together. And so that has been a big benefit. We have native services on the site. I think I mentioned medical respite. We have a couple medical respite rooms. We have agricultural workforce services on the site. And then DHS does eligibility benefits. And then we also have turned one of our manager's apartment rooms, which we don't have a manager in this apartment anymore, but we turned one of those rooms into a clothing closet. So we have a volunteer who comes in, sorts clothes, washes them, and then we can provide those clothes to the clients at the facility.
I would just quickly add that one of the most requested upgrades we get at our facility is a pool. And we're not putting one in, but we did not have a pool. The nice thing about this space is that there's a lot of different possibilities that you can use with it that sometimes you don't realize because you don't have it. So the shelters generally make people leave during the day. And so it's harder to catch up with folks who need services. So having a place where people can just be is great, because now we can bring senior disability services on site, other services on site, and we know where people are going to be. That's been a huge benefit. The other thing too is we discovered microwaves are great for a little while, but it's really hard for people to make food that they like. And so we actually converted one of the rooms into a kitchen. And so people they have a full kitchen and a pantry. We have a fully stocked pantry. They don't have to ask for permission to go in it. They can grab what they want and they can make a meal that they like.
I stopped by that kitchen to drop off some leftover food from an event last month, and it was amazing to see the community and collaboration that was happening in that space. Well, community opposition, not in every case, but in some cases, was really high to these projects. And Kenny, I know you in particular had a volatile situation that you had to address. And I wonder if you want to share a little bit about how you handled that neighborhood community pushback that was not your standard run-of-the-mill NIMBYism, but actually dangerous.
Yeah, I've been through NIMBYism on affordable housing projects before. This was the most unique NIMBYism I've ever seen before, to the point where it was getting, like, my wife didn't want me to go to the Dalles at night because I was getting threats on social media. We had a town hall about the project, and the Proud Boys showed up like in military garb. So it got really pretty challenging. And we have super siting capability with shelters and with conversion of hotels. You better believe I used it. And I had no problem with doing it. The neighborhood, really went up in arms over it. And in fact, we had a state legislator who coordinated an anti-Project Turnkey rally at a business in downtown. And that, was kind of like, I thought they were going to come down the street like in pitchforks. I wasn't in town, but it really got pretty volatile. In fact, I believe he wrote he has like a newsletter that goes out, and there was a whole thing in his newsletter, which I believe was titled "Don't Portland My Organ." So we dealt with a lot of volatility. People thought we were going to destroy the fabric of downtown the Dalles. If you haven't been to the Dalles. And I will say that where you have negative energy, you have to have positive energy on the other side. That's how energy works. And we certainly had just as much positive energy and positive contribution to this project. So it wasn't just about NIMBYism. It created a lot of synergy amongst community members. I didn't have to defend the project. We had partners, we had community members who believed that people needed to have access to safe and stable housing, and they went to city council, and they were the ones screaming on Facebook, which anybody can do that, but they were definitely defending our project a lot. And we ended up having because of all the, I'll say it's because of the pushback, but because people believed in the project as well. We had, I think we received around $400,000 from our health council to do additional renovations on the project. So some of the renovations we're doing, most of them were funded by the Oregon Community Foundation, but there were things that we really wanted to do, like put hard surface flooring in, and we were able to do that. We were also able to, paint all the rooms. And it just really came together well when it came to that. And then we also have had around 150 volunteers who have come out, helped clean rooms, get them ready. I mentioned welcome baskets for the site. And we find that people are continuously reaching out to us, asking for volunteer opportunities related to the site. So a lot of synergy created. The NIMBYism now, as we complete this project, is a little different. It is the same business that hosted the rally contacted me and asked me for my stucco guy's information because our building looks phenomenal. And I would say, like, if we do see any NIMBYism, it is, this place is too nice now. So I'm fine with that. Fine, it's too nice. Maybe your expectations are too low. So we've really changed, I think, the face of things in the community. When we opened on August 28th, there was a story in the newspaper. I mean, it's the Gorge. It's not like a lot of news pressure or anything, but we had a news article that came out about one of our residents who's a veteran. And I'll say one of the NIMBYists was the owner of the Toyota dealership in the Gorge. And the news did a story on one of our clients who's a veteran. That client is the auto detailer for Columbia Gorge Toyota. So I was able to send the owner of Columbia Gorge Toyota that article and said, hey, just wanted to make sure you saw this. And he did respond and say, yeah, that he's been a great client. And I think what people don't know is, like, the folks who are staying in these facilities are our potential workforce, our current workforce. And we struggle with workforce in the Gorge. Because we have housing challenges just like everywhere else. We're in a national scenic area, so there's not a lot of buildable land out there. But we've definitely been able to change the face of how services are provided because of this project. And like I said, it is literally the first building you see when you drive into downtown. So we're very proud of the way it's coming together.
Yeah, thank you, Kenny. And I just want to say I'm sorry for the personal attacks that you had in trying to support your most vulnerable neighbors. It was disheartening to witness that and to not be able to, for all of us collectively, to provide adequate support. But your positive energy was really amazing to see. So thank you. Thank you so much. Jane, I know you also had some community pushback and you had a wonderful way of handling it. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we started hearing that the neighborhood association had found out that this was going to be a domestic violence shelter, and a lot of rumors spread around very quickly of that abusers would be coming on site and that it would be dangerous for the neighbors. And so I actually reached out to the neighborhood association and said, I'd love to come. I want to be able to have a conversation. And we had delayed that a little bit because we were putting in all the security. I'd planned to do it, but they just got ahead of me. And so went there, had a conversation with them about all the ways in which we take care of folks, how our model works, the way that we deal with situations. And then we put out a brochure that talked about Mosaic and all of that information, and put my number on there and told the neighborhood association, if you have any concerns that come up, call me. I have not received a single call. And they voted that night to support the project and have been incredibly supportive since that time. And so, and I plan to keep going back to the neighborhood association and just checking in and, making sure that we stay on top of that. But it's been wonderful to not have to deal with that same kind of response.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have one more question for them, but I know you all probably have a lot of questions. And so I'm going to come down and see if anybody out here wants to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious, with the Project Turnkey projects that you've done, what elements of the design, either that was existing or that you have or are incorporating with your renovations, were what are your lessons learned? What are the things that you wish you'd done that you didn't do, or what are the things that you did do that you're like, this is the best decision we ever made?
Well, I want to say getting a motel was one of the best decisions we ever made. We've known for years that trauma-informed services and having people in their own spaces was a better way to go, but you get kind of stuck in your models, and congregate shelter for us was that model for domestic violence shelter. So having this opportunity to have a motel has been huge. And I would say the big lessons for me were check the load for electrical, not depend on the key lock system, things like that, that we were just were surprised that we had to do. But it's been a wonderful thing for us.
One of the things that I'm most excited about in our renovation is that we are also getting rid of our carpet, and we were going to go with a solid floor. But our vendor introduced us to something called Kinetex that our local Union Gospel Mission had just put in. And it's some kind of woven silicone, something. It looks like carpet. It has the sound qualities of carpet. But you can also wash bodily fluids out of it and steam it and change out just a square. So we're really excited to have a soft surface. So it's just looking through things like that and making sure that, I think we always are pressing our vendors, to think outside the box and what's really going to work for us and still not look sterile.
Well, we'll probably find out more in the coming months. I think one of the things throughout the construction of this project is just be flexible, be ready. Don't get stuck to your plans because they're going to go out the window pretty fast. You're going to need to be ready to change on the dime, and don't let it hurt you. I mean, it's not really the end of the world. Just be ready to change. I mean, construction, Travis, so we've been flexible in that way. One of the first things that I was told, and we had gone out and toured some other turnkey sites, is the first thing you need to really figure out is where is the smoking area. And that is literally what we were like, this is the smoking area. So we made sure to identify that spot in the facility. That probably is one of the biggest things, but we've had so many things come up. I mean, electrical, I think we're putting about $130,000 in electrical upgrades. This hotel had one water heater serving 39 rooms. So we have more now. I think we have 6 water heaters in the facility, but I really don't know how it was operating on that number of water heaters. Lots of just, like I said at the beginning, when we opened, and I'm glad we did a soft opening because plumbing was being challenged in a way that it hadn't been challenged before. And so just working through those things without having, 54 households there. Imagine what that would be like if you have 54 households. So we're also, as we had originally anticipated when we moved people in, that we would kind of do this big opening and everybody would move in at one time. We're not doing that. We are doing kind of one at a time, open rooms up and get our staff familiar with each client. We want to make sure we intake right. We want to make sure partners who are serving people are involved in the intake, and we're not pressuring ourselves to get this whole thing, all the rooms open at once. We just want to do it one at a time, test the infrastructure, make sure things are working, and work out the kinks in a way that is safe for staff to go through. Another thing is everybody needs to know where the breakers are and all that kind of stuff. Before we had nothing. So just trying to figure out where all that stuff is, and not having 75 people there is nice to be in that situation.
And just real quick, 1950s apparently was not as concerned about accessibility. None of our rooms were accessible, only one. And so we're in a unique position because we are getting ready to build and we have the audience that we're building for right on location. So we have had many opportunities to talk with people to say, hey, what is it that you need? So for example, just one quick thing, the new design, no internal hallways. We're having external access, etc. But there's just so many, talk to the people who you're going to put in housing because they know what they need and the ideas are really good.
Just one more, we looked at a hotel and their ramp was like cement that was probably at like a 45-degree angle. And we're like, people just slide right out into the street. One of the things I think we found with our lobby in the 2 years we've gone through 6 or 8 renditions of what we're using that space for. Whenever I meet with our shelter staff, I come back to Jane. I'm like, so they want to do this. And she's like, we just changed it this way. So I think the one thing we have learned, I mean, I think we're getting really close to having it as functional as possible, is to be flexible and start thinking small. So maybe instead of building permanent walls, try some dividers and, you know, see if that works, because you just can't tell. And we really could not have predicted how things would have looked and how things would flow until we really were getting in there and living in the space. So I think in hindsight, we might have slowed down a little bit but I also think like we're making really positive changes. We keep changing things.
I just had a question about the sauna and the bed bugs. So, because we have a sauna at CPR and are you just putting the stuff in there and using it like a hot box? Like, does it actually really work? I need to know more.
It's an actual bed bug oven. It's not a sauna.
Oh,
So I was joking. I mean, I suppose you could use it as a sauna because it's 130 degrees. And I think that's the same as an infrared sauna. But I don't know if you'd want to do that. It could fit a couch in it. Like it's very large. It has hangers in it. And every client who moves in, all of their stuff that's going in the room with them goes into the bed bug oven for 3 minutes and then comes out and goes into the room with them. So I think we could get our whole team in there. Yeah.
I don't know if that's bonding or hazing, but
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah. Other question.
I have had the greatest time hearing about all the different projects and I can identify with almost every single one of those items. I have a curiosity question. When you're going to the induction burners, is that taking you through a conditional use change? I mean, how does that land you in zoning and what has that process been like for you if you had to do that?
So far, they haven't asked questions about it. I mean, it's in the plans and it's with the city right now. So,
And the city's paying for them.
yeah. Oh, that's right. They did.
Oh.
They paid for our kitchenettes.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
I think when it comes to like zoning and building codes and stuff, it's probably different everywhere on what you're going to get hammered with or not. So I know one of the things when we were like, we're going to convert this room to a laundry room, like we didn't really think much about it. And then the county's like, oh, you're converting. So there's a change in use. And we're like, it's temporary. And they're like, oh, okay. So.
And our city, 3 different times we've gone for railings and now our city keeps saying, well, you're not zoned to be a shelter. And it's like, well, we've been operating for 2 years before the sale went through. We made sure communication is sort of a nightmare.
We have a letter from you that says it can be a shelter,
Yeah. They just haven't told each other.
While Megan's walking back there, I just want to make sure you all know, and I heard this from another Project Turnkey, they did do some legislative change and you can do a bit of your shelter as transitional and charge up to $300 as long as they have the resources to be able to pay it. I want to make sure that's really clear, but it's going to give us the opportunity to eventually do something we wanted to do, which is change some of them to transitional so we could serve as a reference for folks that very often with domestic violence, they don't have good references. So this is an exciting change for us. It's House Bill 3395. Check it out.
I was just curious because this is very new to me, so thank you for this information. But what are some of the requirements of the people coming into these facilities? For example, you mentioned it's about 30% of the homeless population in the Dalles. So what's determining what 30% make it there? Are there the same types of requirements like within shelters in Portland, and how that kind of works?
Yeah, so we put everybody through the coordinated entry process. So they're receiving coordinated intake, they're getting a vulnerability score. That doesn't necessarily get them in if they're high on the score. They have to, I think I mentioned a housing case management plan. So when they come in, they have to enter into a housing case management plan, and they can stay for up to 6 months as long as they're working on the housing case management plan. This is transitional, right? So you got to be ready to transition. And our goal is to prevent people from coming back to us unnecessarily. So if they're checking the box on their housing case management plan over that 6-month time frame, if they get to the 6-month mark and we see that they're checking the box, it's written down, right? So we're not having any fair housing issues. We're not arbitrarily deciding who gets to go or stay. As long as they're checking the box, we can extend them for an additional 6 months if they're working towards that permanent housing placement. They cannot use drugs on our site. We don't drug test. It's behavior-based, but they cannot use on the site. They cannot drink alcohol on the site. They cannot fight. If they go off-site and do any of those things and they come back, as long as they're not, bothering neighbors or anything, if they come back, go in their room, go to sleep, we're fine with it. If they come back and they try to fight my shelter manager, then they're not going to be able to stay. And that's whether they're sober or intoxicated, they would end up in that same position. But those are kind of our basic requirements for folks who are coming in.
I have, I guess, partly a 2-part question, and partly for OCF is about the application and the building acquisition. Were these sites pre-approved by OCS that you could select from, or did you find these ahead of time? And then part of the application process, did you have to submit some type of like feasibility insurance that, this property is safe for people to move into? It kind of sounds like there was a lot of unknowns in development, and I was wondering if you had to bring like a development team, architect, engineer, contractor on board early to figure these things out.
Do you want one of us to answer?
Sure.
So OCF supported us throughout the whole process. So when we were selected to be a participant, we did not necessarily have a property yet. So you're selected as a participant, and then we were assigned a real estate consultant. And that real estate consultant came out and looked. We already knew which property we wanted and had already talked to the owner about it. But the real estate consultant that was working with OCF came out and helped us look through the property, checked it out, and basically said, yeah, this is good to go, and then helped us through the offer negotiation process. So then we also had an inspection done on the building itself, which also was facilitated by the consultant with OCF, which was very helpful to have somebody involved in that process. As a homeless services provider, right? We're like, cool, we want to buy this hotel, but the consultant helped us say, no, we're not budging on the price, or we need this done if we're going to buy it. So that was very helpful throughout the process. And then, I mean, there's kind of like a second part in the application process too. Once you find your property, then it does go back to OCF for approval. So based on what you're purchasing, how much it is, all the services you're planning to offer, because obviously what you're going to do changes on the makeup of your building. So our building is all exterior corridor entry, which is awesome to have that. So it can change based on the building you're purchasing, number of rooms, all that kind of stuff. So obviously we couldn't do family shelter if we had a much smaller facility that was just one building.
Well, I know that we're running out of time, and I want to ask all of you, just as a wrap up, if you can share some of your future dreams for your properties.
Yeah, I would say this property has made us so excited about the future and all the things that we can do there. One of the things we want to do, somebody mentioned utilities, that's our greatest expense there. We want to put in solar. We have a tile roof, so we can't put it on the roof. So we are looking at doing carports with solar arrays on top so that we can reduce that cost that's coming into this property. Then we mentioned about renovating the pool area as a nice play area for the families. Ultimately, we want to put a childcare center in there. Y'all know how difficult it is to get childcare, and that's really difficult for our residents. And so we're excited about the potential for that in the future. And then I mentioned that we want to ultimately be able to do some transitional housing there. We're actually building some permanent housing right now. And so we would have the continuum of what survivors need: emergency shelter, transitional, and then permanent housing.
I mean, we're opening, we have a grand opening on October 12th. I'm excited about the family side of the shelter, being that we don't have family shelter. We already have basically all the rooms filled once we are ready to open. So we're super excited about that. We know we're going to need to build additional housing in our communities. So a lot of folks are in need of permanent supportive housing. So we just completed the Permanent Supportive Housing Institute with the state, and we are planning on building, hopefully, pending successful application, we're planning on building on another site that we own, and that will likely become a pretty consistent referral transition spot for folks who are living in the annex. But we're excited to get it opened and get it fully running. And that's kind of where we're at right now. We're content with that.
I think our whole project just feels like a dream. When we have it open, it will double the amount of units that we have available. That's huge. This is a brand new facility. It's just beyond my wildest imagination that we could have this facility for folks. I would add to that, and I think most of us are also concerned about this trend, is just the number of seniors that we're seeing. And so I am really excited to be able to offer some housing to folks who have a limited income and will always have a limited income, that now is just, it's beyond, the rents are beyond their income in Corvallis. So that is a population that I'm really, really excited to be able to offer permanent housing to.
Well, thank you so much, Dan and Kenny and Sarah and Jane, for spending some time with us today and sharing about your projects. This has been the most meaningful work I've ever done in my 29-year career. This is it. This is the pinnacle, really, of the work. And I am so grateful and honored to be able to partner with each of you to bring these properties online, which leads to an increase in 1,400 units of shelter that did not exist in our community 3 years ago, that is supporting our most vulnerable neighbors. So I just want to thank all of you for stepping into that very brave space. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We'll be here for a few minutes if you have any additional questions, and just thanks for coming. And good luck to those of you out there who are still in the midst of renovations. I know there are a few.